She signed medical authority without hesitation. The emergency room was chaos, board members shouting, family demanding answers, cameras flashing beyond the police barricades. Korea's third-largest conglomerate was collapsing because its CEO couldn't breathe on his own. Everyone expected her to break. She didn't cry, didn't panic, didn't ask what happened or who was responsible or whether he would survive. She took control. The doctors needed consent for surgery. She gave it. His mother tried to remove her from the room. She refused to leave. The board attempted to claim decision-making authority. She shut them down with 3 sentences. For 8 days, she sat beside his hospital bed while the media called her cold, calculating, dangerous. They whispered about how she controlled him, how she'd married Korea's most powerful man and kept him under her thumb through means no one could prove. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was the truth that would have shattered every assumption. In 2 years of marriage, she had never touched him. Not the way they imagined. Not in any way that mattered. She hadn't conquered him through intimacy. She'd conquered him through distance. And the moment someone tried to kill him, she realized that distance had become the most dangerous lie she'd ever told. Control was never the weapon. Choice was. Some stories don't begin with love. They begin with control. And what everyone believed was only half the truth. Velvet Plot tells the rest. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and fear. Sung Hospital's top floor had been cleared within 20 minutes of the ambulance arrival. Security personnel lined the corridors. Board members clustered near the nurses' station, their voices low and urgent. Cameras flashed beyond the police barricades downstairs, entertainment reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story before his family had. Lee Junwoo, CEO of Hanjin Industries, Korea's third-largest conglomerate, had been found unconscious in his office at 11:30 p.m. Initial reports called it exhaustion. The paramedics knew better. His wife arrived 40 minutes after the ambulance. She didn't run, didn't cry out, didn't ask frantic questions. She walked through the chaos in a black coat and heels that clicked against the linoleum with mechanical precision. Her hair was pulled back. Her face was the kind of beautiful that made people uncomfortable, dark skin that seemed to absorb the fluorescent lighting, features that revealed nothing. The head of the board stepped forward. "Mrs. Lee, the doctors need. I know what they need." Her voice cut through the noise like a blade through silk. She moved past him toward the trauma bay where 3 surgeons were waiting. One of them held a clipboard. She took it, scanned the consent forms, and signed without hesitation. Her signature was illegible, efficient. "He has a severe concussion, possible internal bleeding, and we're waiting on toxicology," the lead surgeon said. "We need to know if there's any history of no drug use, no alcohol dependency, no prior head injuries." Her answers were clinical. "He takes blood pressure medication. Nothing else. His medical records are being sent from his private physician." "Mrs. Lee, we should discuss the possibility that—" "Do the scan first. We'll discuss possibilities after you have data." The surgeon blinked, nodded, disappeared behind the double doors. Junwoo's mother arrived next, flanked by his younger brother and 2 aunts. They swept into the waiting area like a storm system, all designer handbags and expensive grief. His mother's eyes found her immediately. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You." The word dripped with venom poorly disguised as concern. "Where were you when this happened?" "At home. Alone." "Yes. How convenient." She didn't rise to the bait. She stood near the window, hands clasped in front of her, watching the surgeons through the observation glass as they wheeled Junwoo toward imaging. His face was slack, lifeless. Blood matted his hair. "Someone should call his attorney," one of the executives murmured. "Already done," she said without turning around. "And the press statement?" "Written. It will be released at 6 a.m. They exchanged glances. She'd anticipated everything. His brother approached her carefully, like someone approaching a sleeping predator. The police want to ask you questions. I know. They think. I know what they think. She turned then, and the look she gave him was so cold, so utterly devoid of defense or fear, that he stepped back. I was home, she repeated slowly. I was reading. He called at 10:45 to say he'd be late. I went to bed at 11. Security footage will confirm I never left the building. His office logs will show he was alone when he collapsed. The forensics team will find exactly what I expect they'll find, evidence of third-party interference. The room went silent. You think someone did this deliberately? His mother's voice shook. I think, she said quietly, that accidents don't happen to men who have everything to lose and enemies who have everything to gain. The CT scan took 40 minutes. She didn't sit. Didn't pace. She stood at the window and watched the city lights blur into dawn. When the surgeon emerged, his expression was grim. There's significant swelling. We need to relieve the pressure immediately. The surgery carries risks. Do it. Mrs. Lee, you should understand that. I understand that if you don't operate, he dies. If you do operate, he has a chance. That's not a difficult decision. She signed the second set of forms. They wheeled him into surgery at 4:30 a.m. The procedure would take 6 hours. His mother tried one more time. You should go home. Rest. We'll call if. No. This isn't. I'm his wife. I'm staying. There was something in the way she said it, not possessive, not desperate, but absolute. Final. As if she'd made a promise to someone who wasn't in the room and intended to keep it. The family retreated to the private lounge. The board members made phone calls. The executives began calculating damage control. She stayed by the observation window. And when the lead surgeon finally emerged at 10:40 a.m., exhausted and cautiously optimistic, she was the first person he saw. He's stable, the surgeon said. We'll know more in the next 48 hours. She nodded once. I want to see him. He won't be conscious for. I want to see him. They led her to the ICU. He looked smaller in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen him. Tubes and monitors surrounded him like a technological cocoon. His face was pale beneath the bruising. She sat in the chair beside his bed. And she didn't leave. By midnight, the nurses had stopped asking if she needed anything. By the second day, they'd learned to work around her. She refused food, accepted only water. She didn't sleep. She watched the monitors with the focus of someone reading a contract for loopholes. His mother came once. Stood in the doorway. You're making a spectacle. She didn't turn around. I'm keeping my husband alive. By sitting here? The doctors are keeping him alive. The doctors are treating his injuries. I'm making sure no one finishes what they started. His mother left without another word. On the third day, a junior executive made the mistake of suggesting she sign temporary power of attorney over to the board, just until Mr. Lee recovers. She looked at him for a long time. No, she said finally. Mrs. Lee, the company needs leadership. The company has leadership. Me? You're not. I'm his wife. I hold his medical proxy. I have full access to his legal documents and financial accounts. And more importantly, she stood, and despite being several inches shorter than him, she seemed to tower. I'm the only person in this building who doesn't benefit from his death. The executive went pale. Get out, she said quietly. He got out. She didn't cry, didn't panic, didn't waver. She took control. And somewhere in the back of everyone's mind, a question began to form, a question no one wanted to ask out loud. Why does she seem more dangerous than devastated? The rumors started before he even woke up. She's cold. She doesn't cry. She barely speaks to his family. What kind of wife acts like that? The tabloids were less subtle. They'd been waiting for an angle, and she'd given them a perfect one. By the 5th day of his hospitalization, the narrative had crystallized. The Ice Queen, How Lee Junwoo's mysterious wife controls Korea's most powerful man. The article featured photos of her leaving the hospital, always alone, always composed, always dressed like she was attending a funeral that hadn't happened yet. The writer speculated about her unusual hold over a man who'd been Korea's most eligible bachelor before their sudden marriage 2 years ago. Sources close to the Lee family suggest the relationship is unconventional. One family member, speaking on condition of anonymity, described Mrs. Lee as calculating and distant. Another noted that she and Mr. Lee maintain separate residences within their penthouse. The comments section exploded. She married him for money, obviously. Look at her face in those photos. No emotion. Creepy. My friend works at Hanjin. She says they never see them together. I heard she has something on him. Like blackmail. The business press took a different angle, but arrived at the same conclusion. Power behind the throne, the woman who really runs Hanjin Industries. Since her marriage to Lee Junwoo, several board members have resigned. 3 major contracts have been renegotiated. The company's legal department has been completely restructured. Coincidence? Or the calculated moves of a woman playing a longer game? Her face appeared on magazine covers she'd never agreed to. Paparazzi camped outside the hospital. Fashion blogs analyzed her intimidation style, tailored suits, minimal jewelry, hair always pulled back in a way that suggested military precision rather than elegance. They called her beautiful, but dangerously so. Like something expensive behind glass. Untouchable. At Hanjin headquarters, the whispers were more specific. She never smiles. I saw her in a meeting once. She didn't say a word for 40 minutes, then completely dismantled the VP's proposal in 3 sentences. My boss says she reviews every major contract personally. Why would she do that unless she's looking for leverage? The general consensus among family and employees and strangers on the internet was this. She controlled him. Not through love. Everyone agreed their marriage was too cold for that. Not through beauty, though she certainly had it. Not through family connections or business acumen, though both were mysteriously absent from her background. No. She controlled him through intimacy, through what happened behind closed doors, through secrets whispered in private moments, through the kind of physical hold that could make a powerful man weak. It was the only explanation that made sense. How else could a foreign woman with no family name, no business pedigree, no social connections, a black woman who'd appeared from nowhere, become the wife of one of Korea's most powerful men? How else could she move through his world with such authority, such absolute confidence that she belonged there? She must have gotten her claws in deep, one columnist wrote. The kind of deep that makes a man sign over everything without realizing what he's lost. What none of them knew, what none of them could have known, was the truth. The truth that would have broken their narrative completely. The truth that lived in the silence of the penthouse, in the space between their separate bedrooms, in the careful choreography of a marriage performed for an audience that believed every lie. She had never touched him. Not in the way they imagined. Not in any way that mattered. They'd never shared a bed. Never shared a kiss beyond what the cameras required. Never shared the kind of intimacy that bound people together through flesh and desire. 2 years of marriage. 730 days. And her hand had never reached for his except when absolutely necessary. She didn't control him through seduction. She controlled him through something far more dangerous. Distance. Because what they feared, what they'd always feared, even when he was conscious and commanding and seemingly untouchable, was that she didn't need him. That she could walk away at any moment. That she was the one person in his entire world who would survive his absence. And somehow, that made her the most powerful person in the room. The nurses noticed it first. How she moved through the ICU like she owned it, not through arrogance, but through the quiet certainty of someone who'd learned to take up space in hostile territory. His family noticed how she never asked for permission. Never sought approval. Never seemed to need anything from anyone. The board noticed how she signed documents with his authority, but never once claimed it for herself. Everyone noticed. And everyone drew the same conclusion. She's dangerous. She's manipulative. She has him completely under her control. What they didn't notice, what they couldn't see, was the way she looked at him when the room was empty. The way her hand hovered near his, never quite touching. The way she whispered something to him in the dark hours of the fourth night, when the monitors beeped steadily and the city slept and no one was there to hear. You're not allowed to die. We had a deal. Not I love you. Not please come back. A reminder of a contract. A boundary. A line that couldn't be crossed. Because that was what their marriage was built on. Not love. Never love. And that was exactly what made her so terrifying. She'd married one of the most powerful men in Korea, lived in his home, bore his name, and never once let him close enough to hurt her. 2 years earlier, the law office smelled like leather and old money. She sat across from Lee Junwoo in a conference room designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Seoul's financial district. The table was black glass. Everything in the room was sharp edges and cold surfaces. He'd been watching her for 3 minutes without speaking. She met his gaze without flinching. You understand what I'm offering, he said finally. Yes. And you understand what I'm not offering. Yes. He leaned back. Studied her. He was younger than the photos suggested, 34, maybe 35. Handsome in the way powerful men often were, less from genetics than from confidence. Tailored suit. Expensive watch. Hair styled precisely. But there was something tired in his eyes. Something hunted. Tell me why you need this, he said. She'd prepared for this question. Had the answer ready. Clinical. Impersonal. I have $15,000 in debt from my mother's medical bills. I'm 3 months behind on rent. My visa expires in 6 weeks, and I don't have the funds to renew it. I have a bachelor's degree in international relations that's been useless in a country that won't hire me because I don't have the right name or face or connections. She paused. I need legal status. I need financial stability. I need to not spend the rest of my life one emergency away from complete collapse. That's very honest. You requested honesty. Most people lie anyway. I'm not most people. He almost smiled. Almost. No, he agreed. You're not. He slid a folder across the table. The contract. She'd seen a draft already, but this was the final version. Read it carefully, he said. My attorney will answer any questions. She read every word. It took 20 minutes. The terms were clear. Marriage duration. 1 year minimum. Renewable annually by mutual agreement. Financial compensation. All debts cleared immediately. Monthly allowance of 10 million won. Full access to household accounts for approved expenses. Living arrangement. Shared penthouse. Separate bedrooms. Complete privacy respected. Public obligations. Attend required social and business functions as his wife. Maintain appropriate image. Support his public interests. Private obligations. None specified. And then, the clause that made everything else make sense. Physical relationship, not required. Not expected. Entirely at the discretion of both parties. She looked up. You're paying me to be your public wife, but not your private one. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Measured. The board of directors has made it clear that my continued position as CEO requires stability. A wife. The appearance of a normal, settled life. His jaw tightened. My father's will includes a clause. If I'm unmarried by 35, my inheritance passes to my brother. I turned 35 in 4 months. So this is about money. This is about control. The money is just the weapon they're using. She understood that. Had lived that. And why not marry someone you actually want? She asked. Because everyone I might actually want comes with family expectations. Social obligations. The requirement that I pretend to feel things I don't feel. He met her eyes. I don't want a real marriage. I want a convincing performance of one. And you think I can perform convincingly? I think you're smart enough to understand the role and desperate enough to play it well. It should have offended her. Instead, It felt like the first honest thing anyone had said to her in months. What happens if I fail? She asked. Define failure. If people don't believe it. If your family challenges the marriage. If the board. Then we divorce, you keep whatever you've earned up to that point, and you walk away clean. No penalties. No consequences. He paused. I'm offering you an escape route with money in your pocket. That's more than most people get. It was. She looked at the contract again. At the number that would clear her debts. At the monthly amount that would let her breathe for the first time in 3 years. What do you get out of this? She asked. My company. My inheritance. My life back. And you don't want anything else from me? He understood what she was really asking. No, he said quietly. I don't want anything else from you. She believed him. Didn't know why, but she did. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his voice. Maybe it was the way he looked at her like she was a business solution rather than a woman. Maybe it was just that she was too tired to care about the why. I have one condition, she said. His eyebrows rose. You're negotiating? You're asking me to marry you. I'm allowed to negotiate. Fair enough. What's your condition? She chose her words carefully. If I'm your wife, if I take your name and stand beside you and play this role, I need you to understand something. She met his eyes. Held them. I will never be used against you. I don't understand. Yes, you do. Silence. He did understand. She could see it in the way his expression shifted. The way something that had been guarded became almost curious. You're afraid, he said slowly, that people will think you're my weakness. I'm afraid, she corrected, that if they think I'm your weakness, someone will try to use me to destroy you. And when that happens, it won't just be your life that falls apart. It will be mine too. She leaned forward slightly. So here's my condition. This marriage stays exactly what it is on paper. Public performance. Private distance. No emotional attachment. No physical intimacy. No possibility that anyone could ever use what we feel or don't feel as leverage. You want a marriage contract that specifically excludes intimacy. I want a marriage contract that specifically protects us both from becoming weapons in someone else's game. He was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up a pen and wrote something in the margin of the contract. Initialed it. Slid it across to her. She read his addition. Both parties agree that emotional and physical intimacy are not components of this marriage. Distance is strategy, not rejection. Protection is paramount. Is that acceptable? He asked. She picked up the pen. Signed. Yes. They were married 3 weeks later in a private ceremony with 2 witnesses and no cameras. She wore a simple dress. He wore a suit. They exchanged rings that felt too heavy. When the officiant said you may kiss the bride, he looked at her with something like a question. She'd nodded once. He'd kissed her cheek instead of her mouth. That night, they moved into the penthouse separately. He showed her to her wing. Gave her the access codes. Told her she could change anything she wanted. This is your home now, he said. You don't need permission to exist here. She'd stood in her new bedroom, larger than her entire previous apartment, and felt nothing. No relief. No excitement. No fear. Just the numb awareness that she'd traded one kind of survival for another. But this time, she'd read the contract first. This time, she'd made sure the exit was clearly marked. Because the one thing she'd learned, the thing that had cost her everything once before, was this. Love made you weak. Trust made you vulnerable. And if you let someone close enough to need them, they would destroy you the moment it benefited them to do so. So she wouldn't need him. She wouldn't love him. She would perform her role flawlessly, collect her compensation, and when the time came, she would walk away without looking back. That was the contract. That was the deal. And for 2 years, she'd kept it perfectly. Until the night someone tried to kill him. And she realized that somewhere along the way, distance had become something more dangerous than protection. It had become the lie she told herself to survive. The penthouse occupied the entire 48th floor. 14,000 square feet of glass and steel and carefully maintained distance. His wing. Her wing. The shared spaces in between that felt more like neutral territory than home. In the beginning, she'd mapped it like a battlefield, identifying exits, understanding sight lines, knowing exactly where she could retreat if necessary. The kitchen was common ground. The living room was for scheduled appearances when his mother visited. The dining room was where they pretended to eat together twice a week, just in case the household staff reported back to his family. Her bedroom faced east. His faced west. They never saw each other's sunrises. The routine had calcified over 2 years into something that felt almost comfortable in its predictability. He woke at 5:30. She woke at 6. By the time she emerged from her room, he'd already left for the gym in the building's lower level. She made coffee, always 2 cups, one for her, one that she'd leave on the counter for him even though he never drank it. A gesture. A performance for the housekeeper who came Mondays and Thursdays. He returned at 7:15. Showered. Dressed. Emerged from his wing looking like the man the business magazines photographed. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, expression that gave away nothing. "Good morning," he'd say. "Good morning," she'd reply. Sometimes they'd sit at opposite ends of the dining table with their respective newspapers and coffee. Sometimes they'd move through the space like ghosts, aware of each other but never colliding. She noticed things about him anyway. How he rubbed his left temple when he was stressed. How he took phone calls on the balcony when he didn't want to be overheard. How he worked until 2 or 3 in the morning at least 4 nights a week. The light under his office door a thin golden line that told her he was still awake, still fighting whatever battles consumed him. She never asked what those battles were. That would have violated the contract. Evenings were worse. Evenings required coordination. "I have a dinner with the board on Thursday," he'd say. 7 p.m. The Peninsula Hotel. "I'll be ready. My mother wants us at her house on Sunday." Lunch. "What time?" "Noon. We can leave by 3 if you manage the conversation correctly." "I always manage the conversation correctly." The ghost of a smile. "You do." They'd attend these events together, his hand on her lower back, careful and impersonal, just enough contact to suggest intimacy to anyone watching. She'd smile at the right moments. Laugh at the appropriate jokes. Stand close enough that cameras caught them as a unit. His mother would watch with vicious eyes, looking for cracks. His colleagues would watch with curiosity, trying to understand the dynamic. Strangers would watch with envy or judgment, depending on their nature. And through it all, she and Junwoo would perform their roles flawlessly. The loving wife. The devoted husband. 2 people who chose each other. Then they'd return to the penthouse, retreat to separate wings, and dissolve back into the truth. There were moments, though. Small fractures in the distance. Like the night 6 months into their marriage when she'd been working in the living room, laptop open, papers spread across the coffee table, trying to finish the online certification program she'd enrolled in because sitting idle made her feel like she was disappearing. He'd emerged from his office at midnight. Stopped when he saw her. "You're still awake." "So are you." He'd crossed to the bar, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey. Hesitated. "Would you like one?" She shouldn't have said yes. But something about the hour, the exhaustion in his voice, the way the city lights made the penthouse feel like a spaceship drifting through space. Yes. He'd poured her a glass. Brought it to her. Sat in the chair across from her, not on the couch beside her. Safe distance maintained. They'd sat in silence for 15 minutes. Then he'd said, very quietly, "Thank you." She'd looked up. For what? For making this easier than I expected it to be. She hadn't known how to respond to that. Hadn't known if it was a compliment or just an observation. "You make it easy too," she'd said finally. "Do I? You don't ask for anything I can't give." Something had shifted in his expression. Something that might have been sadness or might have been relief. "No," he'd agreed. "I suppose I don't." He'd finished his drink. Stood. Paused. "Good night. Good night." And that had been it. The most intimate conversation they'd had in 6 months. Or the afternoon she'd been in the kitchen when he'd come home early, something that never happened. His tie was loosened. His expression was darker than she'd ever seen it. Bad day, she'd asked, because the silence felt wrong. Bad month. Anything I should know about? No. But he'd stayed in the kitchen, leaned against the counter, watched her chop vegetables with the kind of focus that suggested he was looking for something to anchor to. You cook, he'd said. Sometimes. I didn't know that. You've never been home when I do. He'd nodded slowly. What are you making? Nothing fancy. Stew. It smells good. She'd glanced at him. He'd looked exhausted. The kind of exhausted that came from fighting battles you couldn't win and pretending you weren't bleeding. There's enough for two, she'd heard herself say. I don't want to intrude. You live here. It's not an intrusion. So they'd eaten together, not in the formal dining room, but at the kitchen island, sitting on adjacent stools like actual people instead of contract partners. He'd asked her about her certification program. She'd asked him about the company, carefully, never prying. He'd answered with more honesty than she'd expected. Sometimes I think about what it would be like, he'd said, to walk away from all of it. The company, the board, the expectations. To just disappear. Why don't you? Because walking away means admitting they won. That they broke me. She'd understood that. Had felt that. You're not broken, she'd said. How do you know? Because broken people don't fight this hard. He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, like he was seeing something he'd missed before. You're not what I expected, he'd said. What did you expect? Someone more fragile. Someone who needed me. Would you have preferred that? No. He'd set down his fork. No, I wouldn't have. They'd finished eating in comfortable silence. That night, when she'd passed his office at 2 a.m. and seen the light still on, she'd left a mug of tea outside his door. She hadn't knocked. Hadn't announced herself. Just left it there. The next morning, the empty mug had been in the kitchen sink. He'd never mentioned it. She'd left tea outside his door 17 more times over the next year. He'd never mentioned those either. These were the small intimacies of their marriage. Not touch. Not confession. Not the merging of lives that actual couples experienced. Just awareness. Consideration. The kind of careful coexistence that people developed when they shared space, but not souls. When your life wasn't being threatened by a mystery, when his world wasn't collapsing, when mortality wasn't sitting in ICU hooked up to machines, it had felt like enough. It had felt safe. But sitting in that hospital room, watching him breathe through a machine, she'd realized something that terrified her. Safe wasn't enough anymore. And she had no idea what to do about that. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the 6th day of Junwoo's hospitalization. She found out about it from his secretary, a sharp woman named Minji who'd worked for him for 8 years and who'd looked at her with something like warning when she'd called. They're meeting at headquarters. 2 p.m. They didn't invite you. They don't need to invite me. I'm his wife. Mrs. Lee, Minji's voice dropped. They're going to try to remove you from decision-making authority. Vice Chairman Park has been making calls all morning. Let him make calls. He has support. The board is scared. They think the company needs someone with experience too. The company has someone with experience. My husband. Who will recover. But until then, they'll wait. She'd hung up and immediately called Junwoo's attorney, a man named Kang who billed $800 an hour and who'd reviewed the medical proxy paperwork with her 3 times to ensure there were no loopholes. Can they override my authority? She'd asked. Not legally. You hold his medical proxy and his financial power of attorney. They'd need to prove incompetence or malfeasance, and they have no evidence of either. What if they try anyway? Then you remind them that their employment contracts include non-compete clauses that I personally wrote. If they push you out and damage the company in the process, they'll spend the next decade in litigation. She'd smiled for the first time in 6 days. Thank you, Mr. Kong. Don't thank me. Just don't let them smell weakness. She'd arrived at Hanjin Industries headquarters at 1:50 p.m. The building was a monument to power, 60 floors of steel and glass in the heart of Seoul's financial district. She'd been here dozens of times for company events, always on Junwoo's arm, always decorative, always silent. Today, she walked in alone. Security recognized her immediately. Bowed. One of them reached for a phone, undoubtedly to alert someone upstairs that she'd arrived. She didn't wait for clearance. She walked directly to the elevator bank, pressed the button for the executive floor, and rode up in silence while the elevator music played something that might have been Brahms. The doors opened onto elegant chaos. Executives moving between offices. Assistants rushing with documents. The hum of business continuing despite the crisis. Several people stopped when they saw her. Stared. She ignored them. The boardroom was at the end of the hall, massive doors, frosted glass, the kind of space designed to intimidate. She opened the doors without knocking. 12 men in expensive suits turned to look at her. Vice Chairman Park sat at the head of the table, Junwoo's spot, she noted with cold fury. He was 60, silver-haired, with the kind of face that suggested he'd spent his entire life calculating angles. Mrs. Lee. His voice was oil over ice. This is a private board meeting. This is a meeting about my husband's company. I'm not private. We didn't invite you because we didn't think it was appropriate to burden you during this difficult time. She walked to the table. Remained standing. They were all sitting, which gave her the height advantage. How considerate. What are you discussing? Park exchanged glances with the board member beside him, Director Choi, who handled international operations and who'd never bothered to hide his disdain for her. We're discussing contingency plans, Park said carefully. In the event that Chairman Lee's recovery takes longer than anticipated. Define contingency plans. Temporary leadership structure. Someone to handle critical decisions until. I handle critical decisions. I have his medical proxy and his power of attorney. Nothing happens without my approval. Mrs. Lee. Director Choi leaned forward. With all due respect, you have no business experience. You don't understand the complexities of running a conglomerate. We're simply trying to ensure stability. Stability. She let the word hang in the air. Is that what you're calling it? What else would we call it? An attempted coup. The room went very still. Park's expression hardened. That's a serious accusation. Is it? My husband has been in the hospital for less than a week, and you're already in his chair discussing how to redistribute his authority. What would you call that? Responsible leadership. You're not leaders. You're employees. And employees don't make decisions about the CEO's authority while he's unconscious. Someone has to. I have to. That's why he gave me power of attorney. That's why I signed the documents that kept this company running when he couldn't. That's why. She placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. I'm the only person in this room who doesn't benefit from his absence. Silence. She could see them processing it, realizing she was right. If Junwoo died, they gained power, shares, control. If Junwoo died, she lost everything. She was the only person in the entire building whose interests aligned perfectly with keeping him alive. Director Choi recovered first. Your loyalty is admirable, Mrs. Lee. But loyalty doesn't qualify you to make complex business decisions. Neither does ambition. But you all seem comfortable with that. Park stood. Tried to reclaim the height advantage. Mrs. Lee, I understand you're under stress. I understand this situation is difficult for you. But you need to understand that this board has a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders. We can't let personal relationships interfere with. My personal relationship? She laughed, sharp, cold. You think I'm doing this because of my personal relationship with my husband? Aren't you? I'm doing this because your fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders means keeping the current CEO alive and recovering. Not staging a leadership coup the moment he's vulnerable. Not redistributing power among people who've been waiting for this opportunity. She straightened. I'm protecting the company by protecting him, which is more than I can say for this board. You can't seriously expect us to. I expect you to do your jobs. All contracts continue as written. All major decisions are delayed until Chairman Lee recovers or until I determine they can't be delayed. All personnel changes require my written approval. She looked at each of them in turn. And if any of you try to circumvent my authority, I'll have Mr. King review every contract, every transaction, every decision you've made in the past 5 years. I guarantee he'll find something interesting. Park's jaw tightened. Are you threatening us? I'm clarifying the situation. You work for my husband. I speak for my husband. Therefore, you work for me until he's capable of telling you otherwise. She moved toward the door. Stopped. Oh, and Vice Chairman Park? Get out of his chair. She left before anyone could respond. In the elevator, her hands shook. She'd just threatened some of the most powerful men in Korea. Had challenged them publicly. Had made herself a target. But she'd also protected him. And somehow, that felt more important than safety. Minji was waiting when she reached the lobby. They're calling legal. Let them call. Mrs. Lee. I know what I'm doing. Minji studied her. Then nodded slowly. Yes, I think you do. She returned to the hospital at 4 p.m. The ICU was quiet. The monitors beeped steadily. Junwoo looked exactly as she'd left him, pale, unconscious, vulnerable. She sat in her chair beside his bed. I just made enemies of your entire board, she said quietly. I hope that was in the job description. He didn't answer. Obviously. But somewhere in the back of her mind, she imagined what he might say if he could hear her. Good. They've needed someone to push back for years. Or maybe. Why are you fighting this hard for a marriage that's not real? She didn't have an answer to that question. Wasn't sure she wanted one. The police came on the 7th day. 2 detectives, one older, one younger, both wearing the kind of polite masks that meant they suspected something but couldn't prove it yet. The older one introduced himself as Detective Huang. His partner was Detective Song. Mrs. Lee, we need to ask you some questions about the night your husband was hospitalized. I already gave a statement. We have some follow-up questions. She gestured to the small waiting room outside the ICU. They sat. She remained standing. What do you need to know? Detective Huang pulled out a notebook. You said you were home the night of the incident. Alone. Yes. Security footage confirms you didn't leave the building. I know. And you spoke to your husband by phone at 10:45 p.m. He called to say he'd be working late. The call lasted 90 seconds. Did he seem distressed? He seemed tired. Not frightened? Not concerned? No. Detective Song leaned forward. Mrs. Lee, we've reviewed the office security footage. Your husband was alone in his office from 8 p.m. until he collapsed at 11:30. No one entered. No one left. I know. So how do you explain his injuries? She met his eyes calmly. I don't. That's your job. You seemed very certain at the hospital that this wasn't an accident. I was. Why? She'd been preparing for this question. Had the answer ready. My husband is a careful man. He doesn't work recklessly. He doesn't take unnecessary risks. And he certainly doesn't collapse from exhaustion without warning. She paused. Someone wanted him vulnerable. The method doesn't matter as much as the intent. That's quite an assumption. Is it? How many of his board members have contacted you? How many have volunteered information? How many seem genuinely interested in finding out what happened? Silence. That's what I thought, she said. Detective Huang flipped through his notes. The preliminary toxicology came back. Your husband had trace amounts of a sedative in his system. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to impair judgment and motor function. Her blood went cold. Someone drugged him. We can't confirm that yet. The sedative could have been from medication he took voluntarily. He doesn't take sedatives. Are you certain? Yes. You live together but maintain separate bedrooms. How can you be certain what medication your husband takes? There it was. The implication she'd been waiting for. She smiled coldly. Because I pay attention, detective. Because I notice things. And because when you live with someone for 2 years, you learn their patterns even if you don't share their bed. Detective Song cleared his throat. Mrs. Lee, we're not trying to imply. Yes, you are. You're trying to determine if I had motive and opportunity. So let me save you time. I had neither. If my husband dies, I lose my home, my financial security, and my legal status in this country. The prenuptial agreement is very clear. Everything reverts to his estate if he dies within the first 5 years of marriage. I gain nothing from his death. I lose everything. Unless you've found another way to benefit. Such as life insurance, hidden accounts, arrangements with business rivals. She laughed. Actually laughed. Detective, if I'd wanted to kill my husband, I would have done it somewhere that didn't immediately point to me as a suspect. I would have made it look like an accident. I would have ensured I had an airtight alibi. She leaned forward slightly. I would have been smart about it. Does this situation look smart to you? Detective Huang studied her. No, it doesn't. Because I didn't do it. Someone else did. Someone who had access to his office. Someone who knew he'd be alone. Someone who stands to gain from his temporary or permanent incapacitation. She straightened. I suggest you focus your investigation on people who actually have motive. Such as the board members trying to claim his authority. The business rivals who've been circling the company for years. The family members who resent his control of the inheritance. She moved toward the door. The list is long, detectives. And I'm not on it. They didn't follow her immediately. She could feel them watching as she walked back to the ICU, back to Junwoo's bedside, back to the vigil she'd been keeping for 7 days. Later that evening, Minji called. The police contacted the office. They're requesting personnel files and security access logs for the night of the incident. Good. Mrs. Lee, they're also asking about offshore accounts. Transactions involving your name. Her jaw tightened. I don't have offshore accounts. I know. But someone filed an anonymous tip suggesting you might. Who? The tip was anonymous. But you can guess. Minji hesitated. Vice Chairman Park's assistant was seen meeting with someone from the prosecutor's office yesterday. Of course. They were trying to frame her. Make her the convenient suspect so they could remove her from decision-making authority and claim they were protecting the company from a dangerous woman. It was almost predictable. Minji, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Pull every financial transaction Park has made in the past year. Every contract he's signed. Every meeting he's attended. I want to know who he's been talking to and what he's been planning. That will take time. Take the time. And Minji? Be discreet. Always. She hung up and looked at Junwoo. He'd been moved to a private room that afternoon, out of ICU, which the doctors said was a good sign. His color was better. The swelling had reduced. But he still hadn't woken up. They're trying to destroy me, she said quietly. They're trying to make me the villain so they can take everything you built. His hand lay on the white sheets. Motionless. She'd never held it. Never wanted to. Touch meant connection, and connection meant vulnerability. But sitting there, watching him breathe, knowing someone had tried to kill him and might try again. She reached out. Stopped an inch from his skin. I will never be used against you. That had been her promise. Her condition. The foundation of everything they'd built together. But what if she'd been wrong? What if the real danger wasn't in connection, but in the illusion that distance could keep you safe? Her hand hovered above his. The monitors beeped steadily. The city lights flickered beyond the window. And for the first time in 2 years, she let herself consider the possibility that the contract they'd signed was destroying them both in different ways. She pulled her hand back. Not yet. Not until she was sure. Not until she knew whether what she felt was real. Or just another performance that had lasted too long. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the deepest truths. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on the 8th night. She'd been asleep, barely, fitfully, in the chair beside his bed. The hospital had stopped trying to send her home. The nurses brought her blankets now. Left water bottles. Pretended not to notice when she stayed through visiting hours that didn't technically apply to her anymore. His hand moved. She saw it in her peripheral vision, just a twitch, fingers curling slightly against the sheets. Then his breathing changed, became less mechanical, more human. She pressed the call button. The night nurse arrived within seconds, followed by the resident on duty. They checked his vitals, examined his responses, murmured medical terminology she'd learned to decode over the past week. "He's emerging from the coma," the resident said. "It's a good sign. But don't expect him to wake up immediately. It could take hours. Maybe longer." They left her alone with him again. She watched his face, waiting for some sign of consciousness, some indication that he was fighting his way back. 3:15 a.m. His eyes moved beneath closed lids. 4:30 a.m. His breathing deepened. 5:42 a.m. His fingers twitched again. And then at 6:07, as dawn started bleeding pale light through the hospital window, his eyes opened. Unfocused at first. Confused. He blinked slowly, trying to orient himself, trying to understand where he was and why everything hurt. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Just waited. His gaze found her. Recognition took a moment. Then something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or relief, or something more complicated. "You're here." His voice was rough, barely audible. "Yes." "How long?" 8 days. He processed that. "You stayed." "I stayed." He tried to sit up. Winced. She reached for the bed controls, raised the back slowly so he could recline without straining. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded. Didn't trust herself to speak. The nurse returned. More checks. More questions. They called the doctor. Within 20 minutes, his room filled with medical personnel assessing his cognition, his memory, his motor function. He answered their questions with the kind of precision that suggested his mind was intact even if his body was still recovering. "Do you remember what happened?" the doctor asked. Junwoo's brow furrowed. "I was working. Late. I remember feeling strange. Dizzy. Then nothing." "Nothing before that? No unusual symptoms? No one in your office?" "No. I was alone." The doctor made notes. "We'll run more tests. But preliminary assessment suggests you're recovering well. You were very lucky, Mr. Lee." After they left, silence settled over the room like snow. Junwoo looked at her. Really looked at her. "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." "When was the last time you slept?" "Actually slept." "I sleep. In that chair. It's adequate." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The company?" "Running. I've been managing decisions with your attorney. The board tried to override my authority. I stopped them." Something that might have been pride flickered across his face. "Of course you did. They're calling legal. Claiming I'm incompetent. Let them call. Kong will destroy them. He's already started." Junwoo closed his eyes. Not from exhaustion, she thought. From something heavier. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that alone." "I wasn't alone. I had Minji. And Kong." And she stopped. And I knew what you'd want me to do." He opened his eyes again. Studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. She didn't. "Did you?" he asked softly. "Yes." "How?" "Because I've been watching you for 2 years. Because I know how you think. Because somewhere in all this distance, I learned you anyway." She didn't say any of that. "The contract was clear," she said instead. "Protect the company. Protect you. Everything else is secondary." He nodded slowly. But something in his expression suggested he'd heard what she didn't say. The morning stretched into afternoon. Doctors came and went. His family arrived, his mother, his brother, aunts and cousins who filled the room with noise and concern that felt more performative than genuine. His mother tried to take over immediately. "Junwoo, you need to rest. Everyone should leave." "She stays," he said quietly. His mother's eyes narrowed. "She's been here for over a week. She needs rest too. We can take care of you now." "She stays," he repeated. Firmer this time. His mother opened her mouth to argue, then saw something in his face that made her stop. They left one by one, resentful, confused. When the room was empty again, Junwoo let out a long breath. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not making me leave." "Why would I make you leave?" "Your family wants." "I don't care what my family wants." He shifted carefully, pain evident in the movement. "You've been here 8 days. You fought the board. You kept everything running. He stopped. Why? Why what? Why did you do all that? The contract doesn't require it. You could have walked away. Let my family handle it. Protected yourself." She'd known this question was coming. Had prepared answers. Rational explanations about protecting her interests, maintaining the agreement, ensuring her own stability. But sitting here, watching him watch her, she found those answers inadequate. "I don't know," she said finally. It was the most honest thing she'd said in 8 days. He absorbed that. "You don't know." "No. But you did it anyway." "Yes. Even though it meant making enemies. Even though the police suspect you. Even though you could have walked away clean." "Yes." Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable. Just waited. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right." She took a breath. Let it out slowly. 5 years ago, I was engaged." Junwoo went very still. She continued. "His name was Marcus. We met in graduate school. He was smart, ambitious, kind. We planned to get married after graduation. Start a life together." Her hands gripped the chair arms. Then his company offered him a promotion. A significant one. It required relocating. And it required a certain image. "He left you." "No. He stayed. At first. But his family, they didn't approve. His colleagues made it clear that having me as a wife would be a liability. That I would hold him back." She stared at the window. "So he asked me to wait. Just until he was established. Just until he had enough power that my presence wouldn't matter." "And you waited." "For 18 months. While he built his career. While I worked 3 jobs to stay afloat. While he promised it would be different soon." She finally looked at Junwoo. Then his mother got sick. Lung cancer. She had 6 months to live. And she told him she wanted to see him married before she died. Junwoo's joy tightened. He knew where this was going. "He married someone else," she said. "Someone his family approved of. Someone who fit." He sent me an email. Said he loved me, but love wasn't enough. That he had to think practically. That I'd understand someday. That's strategic. That's what it was. Cold and strategic and completely logical. Her voice didn't shake. She'd told the story to herself so many times it had lost its ability to wound. Mostly. His mother died 3 weeks after the wedding. He got his promotion. Last I heard, he's a VP now. Happy life. 2 children. And you. I learned something." She met his eyes. "I learned that love makes you a weapon. That when someone needs you, they'll use that need to destroy you. That the moment your presence becomes inconvenient, you become disposable." She paused. "So when you offered me a contract marriage, when you promised distance, protection, clear terms, it felt like the first safe thing anyone had offered me in years." Junwoo was quiet for a long time. "That's why you insisted on the no intimacy clause," he said finally. "Yes. Not because you didn't want intimacy. Because you didn't want to be vulnerable." "Yes. And staying here these 8 days fighting for me, protecting me, that violated everything you promised yourself." She nodded. "So why did you do it?" This was the question. The one she'd been avoiding. The one that kept her awake at 3 a.m. staring at the monitors and wondering when exactly the contract had stopped being enough. "Because," she said slowly, carefully, "somewhere in these 2 years, I stopped seeing you as a contract. And started seeing you as..." She stopped. Couldn't finish. He waited. "I don't know what you are to me," she admitted. "You're not my husband. Not really. But you're not just a business arrangement either. She searched for words. "You're the person who gave me space when I needed it. Who never asked for more than I could give. Who kept every promise he made. And when someone tried to destroy you, I couldn't, Her voice cracked slightly. I couldn't let them win. Silence. Then, very quietly, I can't love you. She looked at him sharply. His expression was careful. Sad. I don't know how. I've spent my entire life learning to control things, manage things, strategize things. Love it's chaos. It's vulnerability. It's everything I've trained myself not to feel. I know. But I can. He stopped. Started again. I can choose you. Her breath caught. I can choose to keep you safe, he continued. To value what you've given me. To want you here even when it's not required by contract. He looked at her with something raw in his eyes. Is that enough? Was it? She didn't know. But sitting there, watching dawn turn into morning, watching him fight his way back to consciousness after someone had tried to erase him, she realized that maybe enough wasn't the right question. Maybe the right question was, what are you willing to risk for something that might not have a name yet? I don't know if it's enough, she said honestly. But it's more than I expected to have. He nodded. Understanding. Then we'll figure out the rest, he said. Together. If you'll stay. She looked at his hand on the sheets. The hand she'd almost touched a dozen times. The hand that had never reached for hers. Slowly, carefully, she reached out. Her fingers brushed his. He didn't pull away. She didn't either. It wasn't love. Wasn't a declaration. Wasn't the moment when everything changed. It was just touch. Simple. Terrifying. Real. I'll stay, she whispered. And for the first time in 2 years, the distance between them felt like something they'd chosen together. Not protection. Not strategy. Just a space they'd been holding. Waiting to see if they'd ever be ready to close it. Recovery was slow. Not the medical kind. His body healed quickly, responding to treatment with a kind of efficiency that made the doctors cautiously optimistic. Within 3 days of waking, he was walking short distances. Within 5, he was refusing pain medication because he needed to think clearly. Within a week, he was arguing with doctors about discharge timelines. No, the slow recovery was something else. It was the careful reconstruction of everything the accident had broken. The board had to be managed. Junwoo handled it from his hospital bed with the kind of cold precision that reminded everyone why he'd become CEO in the first place. He reviewed contracts on a laptop, participated in video conferences, made decisions that subtly dismantled Vice Chairman Park's attempted power grab. She watched him work with something like fascination. This was the man people feared. The strategist who'd built an empire before 40. The CEO who treated business like warfare and won every battle through preparation rather than aggression. But she also saw the moments when his hands shook slightly. When he closed his eyes and pressed his fingers to his temples. When exhaustion made his mask slip and revealed someone who was terrified and trying not to show it. You should rest, she'd say. I'm fine. You're recovering from attempted murder. That's not fine. If I rest, they'll think I'm weak. If you collapse again, they'll know you're weak. He'd looked at her then. Really looked. When did you get so good at this? At what? Seeing through me. She'd smiled slightly. I've had 2 years of practice. The police investigation moved forward. Slowly. Frustratingly. Detective Huang returned on Junwoo's 4th day of consciousness with updates that felt more like questions. The toxicology confirmed the sedative was administered approximately 1 hour before you collapsed. It was mixed with something else, something that would have been nearly tasteless in coffee or tea. I didn't drink anything. I didn't make myself that evening, Junwoo said. Are you certain? Yes. No deliveries? No one brought you anything. My secretary brought me coffee at 8 p.m. from the office machine. I watched her pour it. Detective Huang made notes. We've reviewed the security footage extensively. No one entered your office between 8 p.m. and when you collapsed. But he hesitated. The cameras show a 3-minute gap. 11:08 to 11:11 p.m. The system logged it as a technical glitch. That's not a glitch, she said from her position by the window. That's sabotage. We're investigating that possibility. You should be investigating certainty. Junwoo glanced at her. Then back at the detective. What about the coffee? Did you test it? The cup was gone when we arrived. Someone had already cleared your office. Who? The cleaning service, according to records. But when we interviewed them, they claimed your office was locked. They couldn't access it. Silence. So someone cleared the evidence, Junwoo said flatly. That's our working theory. And you're no closer to knowing who. We have suspects. We're building a case. After the detective left, Junwoo stared at the wall with an expression she'd never seen before. Not angry. Not frightened. Calculating. You're thinking about who had access, she said. I'm thinking about who had motive and access and intelligence. The list is shorter than you'd expect. Park. Too obvious. He benefits, but he's not subtle enough for this. Junwoo tapped his fingers against the bedrail. This was someone who understands systems. Who could manipulate security cameras. Who knew my schedule and patterns well enough to time it perfectly. Someone inside the company. Someone inside my inner circle. The implications hung heavy in the air. She moved to sit in the chair beside his bed, the chair that had become hers over 8 days. What are you going to do? What I always do. Wait. Watch. Let them think they got away with it. He looked at her. And when they make their next move, because they will, I'll destroy them. There was no heat in his voice. No emotion. Just cold certainty. This was the man who'd built an empire. And she was beginning to understand why people feared him. But she wasn't afraid. Maybe she should have been. His mother came that afternoon. Alone, for once, without the entourage of relatives who usually accompanied her like emotional warfare. She sat in the chair opposite his bed. Looked at both of them with eyes that revealed nothing. The doctors say you'll be discharged soon, she said. Yes. You'll come home. To the family house. Where you can be properly cared for. No. I'll go to the penthouse. His mother's jaw tightened. Junwoo, you need proper care. Proper nutrition. Not, she glanced at her. Whatever arrangement you have there. The arrangement, Junwoo said quietly, is my marriage. And I'll recover in my home. That's not a home. It's where I live. With my wife. Who has been here every day for 2 weeks while you visited twice. His mother's face went cold. I had responsibilities. I couldn't abandon. Neither could she. But she did anyway. The silence was brutal. His mother stood. Smoothed her dress with hands that shook slightly, the only sign that her composure was fracturing. I see, she said. You've made your choice. I made my choice 2 years ago. You just didn't want to accept it. She left without another word. When the door closed, Junwoo let out a long breath. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For being the reason your family hates you. He looked at her. They hated me long before you. You just gave them a target. He paused. Besides, you're not the reason. You're the excuse. What's the difference? The reason is that I won't play by their rules. That I built something they can't control. That I'd rather have a contract marriage to someone who respects my boundaries than a real marriage to someone they chose. He held her gaze. You're just the visible proof that I don't need their approval. She absorbed that. Is that what I am? Proof. No. He said it firmly. That's what you were. In the beginning. When this was just a contract. Something shifted in his expression. But you stopped being proof somewhere along the way. What am I now? He was quiet for a long time. I don't have words for it yet, he admitted. But it's not what we agreed to in that law office. She nodded. Understanding. Because she didn't have words for it either. They discharged him on the 14th day. The media was waiting, cameras, reporters, questions shouted across police barricades. His PR team had prepared a statement. He ignored it. Instead, he walked out of the hospital with her beside him. Not touching. Not performing for the cameras. Just together. The photos would be everywhere by evening. The speculation would be endless. But for once, she didn't care what the narrative was. Because the only story that mattered was the one they were still writing. One careful step at a time. The penthouse felt different when they returned. Same space. Same separation of wings. Same carefully maintained distance. But something had shifted. He didn't retreat immediately to his office. She didn't disappear into her room. They stood in the living room, surrounded by city lights and silence, and acknowledged what they'd both been avoiding. Everything had changed, and neither of them knew what to do about it. "I should let you rest," she said finally. "I've been resting for 2 weeks. You know what I mean." He nodded, but didn't move toward his wing. "I'm glad you're home," she said quietly. "So am I." They stood there for another moment. Close, but not touching. Together, but not merged. Then he did something unexpected. He reached out and took her hand. Not briefly. Not symbolically. He held it. Gently. Like he was testing whether this was allowed. Whether the contract they'd signed 2 years ago had room for this kind of contact. Her fingers curled around his. "Thank you," he said, "for saving my life." "I didn't." "You did. In every way that matters." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be more than what we agreed to. But I want to try." Her heart was beating too fast. Try what? Being honest. Being present. He paused. Being whatever we become when we stop hiding behind distance. It was the most vulnerable thing he'd ever said to her. And the most terrifying. Because honesty required risk. Presence required exposure. Becoming something new required destroying what was safe. "I don't know how either," she admitted. "Then we'll figure it out together. What if we fail?" "Then we fail honestly." Which is more than most people get. She looked at their joined hands. At the space between them that was still there but felt less like protection now. More like a choice they were making. To stay. To try. To see what happened when the contract stopped being enough and something else took its place. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's try." He smiled, rare, genuine, transformative. And for the first time since she'd met him, she thought that maybe love wasn't about control or vulnerability or the weapons people made of your heart. Maybe love was about choosing someone even when you didn't have to, even when the contract didn't require it, even when it scared you more than anything else. Maybe love was just this. Two people standing in a penthouse at midnight, holding hands for the second time ever, agreeing to risk everything they'd built for something they couldn't name yet. It wasn't a happy ending. It was barely a beginning. But it was real. And real was enough. 3 weeks after his discharge, Junwoo called his attorney. She didn't know about the meeting until Kong arrived at the penthouse with a leather portfolio and an expression that suggested he'd tried to talk his client out of something and failed. "Mrs. Lee," Kong said when she opened the door. "Your husband requested I bring some documents." "What documents?" He should explain. Junwoo was in his office, the one in the penthouse, not at headquarters. He'd been working remotely, rebuilding strength, letting the board think he was weaker than he was. Strategy, always strategy. She found them sitting across from each other at the desk. 2 water glasses. The portfolio opened between them. Junwoo looked up when she entered. "Close the door." She did. "Sit." She sat in the chair beside Kong. The attorney looked uncomfortable. That was unusual. "I'm terminating our marriage contract," Junwoo said. The words landed like stones in water. Heavy. Final. She felt nothing. Then everything. Then nothing again. "I see. No penalties. No conditions." He slid papers across the desk. "Kang has prepared the dissolution agreement. All debts remain cleared. You'll receive a settlement of 500 million won, approximately $400,000. Enough to establish yourself independently. Your visa status will be secured through a separate legal mechanism. You'll retain full access to the penthouse for 60 days while you make arrangements." She looked at the papers. Legal language. Dense. Absolute. "Why?" "Because you earned your freedom." "That's not an answer." Junwoo leaned back. His expression was unreadable. "You stayed with me when you didn't have to. You fought for me when walking away would have been easier. You made yourself a target to protect something that wasn't even real." He paused. The least I can do is give you the choice to leave without consequences. And if I don't sign? The contract continues as written. 1-year renewable terms. You remain legally bound. His voice was careful. Empty. But you'll always wonder if you stayed because you wanted to or because you couldn't afford to leave. Kong cleared his throat. Mrs. Lee, I should clarify, this is an exceptionally generous settlement. More than the original contract stipulated. And the visa arrangement he's proposed will grant you permanent residency independent of marital status. You would be completely free. Free. The word felt foreign. She'd spent 5 years learning to survive without freedom. Learning to calculate angles, measure risks, trade pieces of herself for stability. Freedom was the thing other people had. People with options. People who weren't one emergency away from collapse. You've thought this through, she said. Yes. The board will use this. They'll say you're unstable. Weak. Let them. Your mother will. I don't care what my mother does. She looked at him, trying to read beneath the mask. Trying to understand what this cost him. You're giving me power over you, she said slowly. If I leave now, after everything, the headlines, the speculation, the investigation, it will look like I abandoned you when you were vulnerable. Yes. It will damage you. Probably. Then why? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. Certain. Because I don't want you here out of obligation. I don't want you here because a contract says you have to be. I don't want you here because you're afraid of what happens if you leave. He met her eyes. I want you here because you choose to be. And that only means something if you're actually free to choose otherwise. Kong shifted uncomfortably. I'll step outside. Give you time to review. He left. The door clicked shut. Silence filled the office like water filling a drowning room. She picked up the papers. Read them carefully. Every clause. Every condition. Everything he was offering. It was more than generous. It was extraordinary. He was releasing her from everything, the performance, the obligations, the careful dance they'd been doing for 2 years. He was handing her an exit that didn't just open a door. It built an entire bridge to a different life. You mean this, she said. Yes. You'll actually let me walk away. Yes. Even though it hurts you. Yes. She set the papers down. When did you decide this? In the hospital. When I realized you were protecting me not because you had to, but because you wanted to. He paused. And then I realized that wanting to isn't enough. That as long as the contract exists, you'll never really know if you're here by choice or by necessity. So you're forcing me to choose. I'm giving you the freedom to choose. There's a difference. Was there? She didn't know anymore. The past 3 weeks had been strange. They'd existed in a kind of limbo, not the old distance, but not intimacy either. They ate meals together sometimes. Watched the news in the same room. Talked about the investigation, the company, the careful reconstruction of his public image. But they hadn't touched again. Not since that first night home. She'd thought it was mutual caution. Thought they were both adjusting to whatever this new thing was. Now she understood. He'd been preparing to let her go. I need time, she said. Take all the time you need. How much time until this expires? It doesn't expire. The offer is permanent. She looked at him sharply. You'd just wait? For however long I need to decide. Yes. That's insane. Maybe. Something that might have been pain crossed his face. But I'd rather wait for you to choose me than trap you into staying. She stood. Needed to move. Needed space to think. I'll read everything. Give you an answer. All right. She walked to the door. Stopped. Junwoo. Yes. What do you want me to choose? He was quiet. Then, I want you to choose whatever makes you free. She left before he could see her hands shake. The documents sat on her desk for 2 days. She read them 17 times. Looked for loopholes, hidden conditions, ways this could be a trap disguised as freedom. Found nothing. He meant it. Actually meant it. She could leave. Start over. Build something that was entirely hers. She ran the numbers. 500 million won plus what she'd saved from her monthly allowances. Enough to rent an apartment, finish her degree, maybe start the consulting firm she'd once imagined before Marcus and medical bills and survival had consumed everything. She could do it. Actually do it. The thought should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of something she couldn't name. On the third day, she found Junwoo on the balcony. Late evening. City lights spreading below like stars trapped in concrete. He was drinking whiskey. Neat. The way he did when he was thinking through problems that didn't have solutions. "Can I join you?" she asked. He gestured to the chair beside him. She sat. They watched the city in silence. "I read the papers," she said finally. "And? They're exactly what you said they were. Fair. Generous. No conditions. Good. You really would let me walk away?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, I had a life before this. Before you. It was small and desperate and exhausting, but it was mine. I made every choice. I owned every consequence." She paused. "Then I signed your contract and gave that up. Traded autonomy for security. Freedom for survival. I know. And I told myself it was worth it. That I could perform the role and keep myself separate. That distance would protect me." She looked at him. "But somewhere in these 2 years, I forgot how to want things for myself. I only knew how to calculate what was safe." "I understand that." "Do you?" "Yes." He took a drink. "I've spent my entire life calculating safety, control, strategy. I've never made a choice that wasn't designed to protect my position or advance my interests." He stared at his glass. "Until you. I wasn't a choice. I was a solution." "You were a solution that became a choice." He set the glass down. "And now I'm trying to give you the same thing. The ability to choose something that isn't about survival or strategy or fear." She absorbed that. "What if I don't know how to choose without those things?" "Then you learn. Away from me, if necessary. With me, if you want." He finally looked at her. "But it has to be real. It has to be yours." The wind picked up. She pulled her jacket tighter. "I'm afraid," she admitted quietly. "Of what?" "Of choosing you and discovering it was just another kind of survival. Of choosing to leave and regretting it. She stopped. "Of not knowing the difference between what I want and what I've been conditioned to accept." "That's fair. Is it enough?" "Enough for what?" "To build something on. This uncertainty. This not knowing." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Honest. "I don't know. I've never tried to build anything on uncertainty before." He paused. "But I know that what we had before, the contract, the distance, the performance, it wasn't enough anymore. And if this is the only way to find out what enough actually looks like, then we risk everything we've built." "Yes." She looked at the city. At the lights that never stopped burning. At the evidence of millions of people making choices and living with consequences and trying to build lives that meant something. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right. When I stayed at the hospital. When I fought your board. When I made myself a target, I told myself I was doing it to protect my interests. To maintain stability. To honor a contract." She turned to face him. "But that wasn't true." "No. No. I did it because the thought of losing you," her voice caught. "The thought of losing you felt worse than any consequences. Worse than being investigated. Worse than making enemies. Worse than anything." His expression shifted. Something raw and unguarded. "But I don't know what that means," she continued. "I don't know if it's love or habit or fear or something else entirely. I just know that when you handed me those papers, when you gave me permission to leave." She stopped. "What?" he asked softly. "I realized I'd forgotten how to imagine my life without you in it." Silence. "Is that enough?" she whispered. "Not knowing what this is, but knowing I don't want to lose it?" He reached out. Slowly. Gave her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand covered hers on the chair arm. Warm. Steady. "Yes," he said. "That's enough." She didn't sign the papers. Not immediately. Not ceremonially. She simply stopped carrying them with her. Left them in a drawer in her desk where they existed as possibility but not as pressure. Junwoo never asked about them. The contract, technically, was still active. But something fundamental had shifted. The legal document that had defined their marriage for 2 years became irrelevant the moment he'd offered to dissolve it. Because now they both knew she was choosing to stay. Every day, every moment, every time she didn't sign, she was choosing. The penthouse stopped feeling like separate territories. Not because they merged spaces, she kept her bedroom, he kept his. But because the walls between them became permeable in ways they hadn't been before. He'd work in his office with the door open. She'd read in the living room. Sometimes he'd emerge for coffee and sit with her for 15 minutes without saying anything. Sometimes she'd bring him tea at midnight and he'd look up from his laptop with something like gratitude. Small things. Quiet things. They started eating dinner together. Not twice a week for appearance's sake, but most nights because it felt strange not to. She'd cook sometimes simple things, nothing elaborate. He'd order in others. They'd sit across from each other and talk about the day, the news, the investigation that was still grinding forward with frustrating slowness. Park resigned, he said one evening, 3 weeks after he'd given her the dissolution papers. Resigned or was forced out? Resigned. Kang made it clear that his alternative was a very public lawsuit. He took a bite of rice. Turns out he'd been manipulating contracts for years. Skimming. Nothing massive, but consistent. Enough to charge him? Enough to ruin him. She processed that. Do you think he was involved in what happened to you? Probably. But we'll never prove it. He set down his chopsticks. The security footage tampering was sophisticated. Professional. Someone with resources. Someone who could afford to hire professionals. Yes. And Park had motive and opportunity. He did. But so did 3 other board members, my brother, and at least 2 business rivals. Junwoo's expression darkened. The problem with being powerful is that the list of people who want you dead is quite long. She didn't like how casually he said that. You're not concerned? I'm cautious. There's a difference. Cautious people don't almost die from poisoning. Cautious people learn from almost dying from poisoning. She wanted to argue. But the set of his jaw told her the conversation was closed. They'd developed a new rhythm. Carefully. Tentatively. He'd ask if she wanted to watch something. She'd say yes or no without calculation. Sometimes they'd sit on opposite ends of the couch with the television on, and neither of them really watching, just existing in shared space. Once, she'd fallen asleep there. Woke up at 2 a.m. covered with a blanket that hadn't been there before. He'd been gone, likely back to his office or his room. But the blanket remained. Evidence of care that didn't require acknowledgement. Physical intimacy remained minimal. Deliberate. They didn't hold hands except occasionally. Didn't kiss except when absolutely required for public appearances, and even then, it was brief, almost clinical. But sometimes he'd touch her shoulder as he passed. Sometimes she'd steady him when his injuries made him unsteady. Sometimes they'd reach for the same thing and their fingers would brush, and neither would pull away immediately. Small touches. Testing boundaries. Seeing what was allowed in this new version of themselves. One night, 6 weeks after his discharge, she found him on the balcony again. Same spot. Same whiskey. But this time, he looked different. Not tired. Not calculating. Lost. What's wrong? She asked. Nothing. Junwoo. He was quiet. Then, I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. Us. Whatever we're becoming. He gestured vaguely at the space between them. I know how to perform intimacy. I know how to maintain distance. I don't know how to be this. Neither do I. That's not reassuring. It's honest. He almost smiled. You're always honest. Even when I don't want you to be. Should I apologize? No. He stopped. It's one of the things he stopped again. She waited. He didn't finish the sentence. She didn't push. Because some things didn't need names yet. Some things could exist in the space between words. I'm terrible at this, he said finally. At what? At being close to someone without controlling them. At wanting someone without strategizing how to keep them. He looked at her. At trusting that you'll stay without binding you to stay. I know. And you're still here. Yes. Why? She considered the question. Gave him the truth. Because you gave me freedom and I chose you anyway. Because that's the only version of this that feels real. She moved to stand beside him at the railing. Because I'd rather have this uncertain, undefined, sometimes uncomfortable thing, than go back to performing safety. He absorbed that. Even though I can't promise you anything, even though I don't know how to love without controlling, even though I might fail at this spectacularly, she looked at him. Then you fail. And we decide what to do next. Together. The word hung between them. Together. Not forever. Not promises. Not the future. Just together. For now. While it worked. While they chose it. He reached for her hand. She gave it to him. They stood like that, holding hands on a balcony 48 floors above Seoul, and acknowledged what they'd both been avoiding. This was real. Undefined. Unnamed. Uncertain. But real. And real was terrifying and beautiful and enough. The investigation officially closed 4 months after the incident. Insufficient evidence. No charges filed. The official report called it inconclusive, which meant someone had gotten away with attempted murder. Junwoo accepted the news with the kind of calm that suggested he'd expected it. So that's it, she said. They just walk away? For now. And you're fine with that? He looked at her with eyes that had learned to be patient. I'm fine with knowing who my enemies are. I'm fine with watching them carefully. I'm fine with waiting for them to make another mistake. He paused. I'm not fine with obsessing over something I can't control. She understood that. Didn't like it, but understood. His return to work was gradual. Half days at first. Then full days. Then the late nights started creeping back. Midnight, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. with the lights on in his office. She'd leave tea outside his door. He'd drink it. They never discussed it. His mother called once. She answered. Let me speak to my son. He's in a meeting. Tell him to call me. I'll let him know you called. She didn't pass the message along. He didn't ask. Some bridges were meant to stay burned. Publicly, the narrative calcified into something she could live with. The Ice Queen. The foreign wife. The woman who controls Korea's most powerful man through means no one can quite prove. Let them think that. Let them whisper. Let them fear. Because the truth was simpler and more complicated. She didn't control him. She chose him. Every day. In small ways. In quiet moments. In the space between what they were and what they might become. And he chose her back. Not through possession. Not through promises. Through presence. Through trust. Through the slow, unglamorous work of building something that didn't have a blueprint. 3 months after the dissolution papers, she finally took them out of her drawer. Junwoo was in his office. She brought them to him. He looked up. Saw what she was holding. Have you made a decision? He asked carefully. Yes. She placed the papers on his desk. Then, very deliberately, she tore them in half. His eyes widened slightly. What? I don't want freedom from you, she said quietly. I want freedom with you. There's a difference. He stared at the torn papers. Then at her. You're sure? Yes. This isn't about the money or the security or... This is about choosing something that scares me because it's real. She met his eyes. This is about trusting that you meant it when you gave me the option to leave. And trusting myself enough to stay. He stood. Moved around the desk. Stopped in front of her. I don't have pretty words for this, he said. I don't know how to make promises or declarations or... I don't want pretty words. What do you want? This. Whatever this is. For as long as it works. He reached up slowly. Gave her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand cupped her face. Gentle. Uncertain. I don't know how to do this right, he whispered. Neither do I. We'll probably fail. Probably. But we'll fail together? Yes. He kissed her then. Soft. Brief. Nothing like the performative kisses they'd shared for cameras. This was real. And real was enough. 6 months later. The board meeting should have been routine. Quarterly review. Budget approvals. Strategic planning. The kind of corporate theater that Junwoo navigated with the precision of someone who'd built an empire before 40. She wasn't required to attend. Hadn't attended any board meetings in the past. But when Junwoo mentioned it over breakfast, casually, not asking, she made a decision. I'll come. He looked up from his newspaper. You don't have to. I know. They'll talk. They already talk. Something shifted in his expression. All right. They arrived separately. His car first, hers 10 minutes later. Still maintaining the appearance of independence even though everyone knew she'd been living in the penthouse for 2.5 years. The executive floor went quiet when she stepped out of the elevator. Assistants stared. Executives whispered. Someone dropped papers. She walked past all of them with the kind of calm that came from no longer caring what they thought. The boardroom doors were closed. She opened them. 14 men in expensive suits turned to look at her. Junwoo was at the head of the table, his rightful place now no longer contested. He didn't look surprised to see her. Gentlemen, he said calmly, my wife will be observing today's meeting. Director Choi started to object. Stopped when he saw Junwoo's expression. She took the empty chair beside her husband. Folded her hands on the table. Said nothing. The meeting continued. Budget reports. Revenue projections. Market analysis. She watched them perform their roles, these powerful men who'd tried to destroy Junwoo when he was vulnerable, who'd tried to use her as a weapon, who'd spent 2 years whispering about her supposed control over their CEO. Now she sat beside him. Not behind him. Not subservient to him. Beside him. Equal. Director Choi made a proposal. Aggressive expansion. High risk. The kind of gamble that would benefit him personally while exposing the company to significant liability. The board murmured approval. Junwoo listened carefully. Then looked at her. Thoughts? She considered. Not because she needed his permission to speak, but because silence was sometimes more powerful than words. The liability structure is flawed, she said finally. You'd be assuming debt at unfavorable terms. And the timeline assumes market conditions that may not hold. It's ambitious, but poorly designed. Silence. Director Choi's face went red. With all due respect, Mrs. Lee, you're not qualified to. She has an MBA in international finance, Junwoo said mildly. Completed last year while you were trying to steal my company. I'd say she's qualified. More silence. She hadn't told him about the degree. Hadn't mentioned the night classes, the online coursework, the 2 years of rebuilding credentials she'd let decay during her desperate years. But he'd known anyway. Had probably known since she started. The proposal is rejected, Junwoo continued. Director Choi, if you'd like to revise and present something that doesn't expose us to unnecessary risk, you're welcome to do so next quarter. The meeting ended 30 minutes later. They left together. His hand on her lower back, light, respectful, real. The whispers followed them to the elevator. Did you hear her? Did you see his face? She's more dangerous than we thought. Let them think that. Let them fear. Because the truth was both simpler and more terrifying than any rumor. She hadn't conquered him. She hadn't manipulated him. She hadn't used intimacy or beauty or cunning to control Korea's most powerful man. She'd simply chosen him. And he'd chosen her back. 2 people who'd started as a contract and become something that had no name. Something that looked like marriage but felt like partnership. Something that appeared cold to outsiders but burned quiet and steady inside. They returned to the penthouse that evening. He disappeared into his office. She worked in the living room on the consulting project she'd started small at first, building slowly, careful not to trade one dependence for another. At midnight, she brought him tea. He looked up, smiled slightly. Thank you. You're welcome. You didn't have to come today. I wanted to. Why? She considered. Because I'm tired of being a ghost in your life. I'd rather be present. Even if it makes you a target? I've been a target since I married you. Might as well be a target who gets to participate. He stood, stretched, winced slightly. His injuries still bothered him sometimes, though he rarely admitted it. You surprised me, he said. Good. You're not what I expected when I hired you. What did you expect? Someone temporary. Someone safe. He moved closer. Someone who wouldn't matter. And instead I got you. It should have been romantic. Should have been the moment when everything crystallized into declarations and promises. But they weren't those people. So instead, she just said, yes. You did. He kissed her forehead. Brief. Chaste. I'm glad, he said quietly. Then he returned to work and she returned to the living room, and they existed in separate spaces inside the same home. Not merged. Not dependent. Just together. The way they'd learned to be. The tabloids never stopped speculating. How she controls him. The Ice Queen's secret power. Inside the coldest marriage in Korea. She stopped reading them. Stopped caring. Let them think she controlled him through manipulation. Let them think their marriage was performance. Let them think whatever narrative made sense to people who'd never understood that power could be shared without being weaponized. Because the truth, the real truth, was something they'd never believe. She'd married him to survive. She stayed with him because she chose to. And that choice, that daily, unglamorous, sometimes difficult choice, was the most powerful thing she'd ever done. Not because it made her dependent, but because it made her free. Free to stay. Free to leave. Free to build something that didn't fit anyone's expectations. Free to love him without needing him. Free to be chosen without being owned. Free to exist beside him as an equal, a partner, a person who'd stopped performing and started living. 1 year later, they renewed the contract. Not because they had to. The original terms had expired. She could have walked away with her settlement and her freedom and her new consulting business that was growing faster than she'd expected. But she signed anyway. New terms. New conditions. Equal partnership. Shared decisions. Separate finances. Mutual respect. And at the bottom, in handwriting instead of type, this marriage is chosen daily. It can be unchosen just as easily. Freedom is the foundation. Choice is the structure. Love, whatever that means, is something we build together. They both signed. No ceremony. No witnesses. Just two people in a law office, making promises they intended to keep as long as they remained true. Are you sure? Kang asked, like he couldn't quite believe they were doing this voluntarily. Yes, they said together. It's unusual. Good, Junwoo said. They left the law office holding hands. The photographers got their shot. The headline wrote itself. The Ice Queen renews her control. Lee Junwoo signs new contract with mysterious wife. She laughed when she saw it. Actually laughed. They really think I control you, she said. Let them think that. Why? Because the truth is more complicated than they'd understand. He looked at her. And I like keeping some things private. She understood that. Some truths weren't meant for public consumption. Some relationships couldn't be explained to people who'd never learned that love could exist without possession. So, let them whisper. Let them fear. Let them speculate about the Ice Queen who never cried, who maintained separate bedrooms, who sat beside Korea's most powerful man without softening or submitting or performing traditional femininity. The truth was simpler. She'd stopped touching him to control him. She touched him now because love, whatever they'd decided to call it, wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a choice. Made daily. Without guarantees. Without promises of forever. Just, I choose you today. And probably tomorrow. And we'll see what happens after that. That was enough. That was everything. 5 years later, the penthouse still had 2 bedrooms. She kept her consulting firm. He kept his company. They kept their separate spaces, their independence, their carefully maintained boundaries. But somewhere along the way, those boundaries stopped being about protection. They became about respect. Respect for the person who'd given her freedom when she needed it most. Respect for the man who'd learned to love without controlling. Respect for themselves, for the journey they'd taken from contract to choice, from performance to presence, from survival to something that felt dangerously close to home. The board still feared her. His family still resented her. The tabloids still speculated. She didn't care. Because at the end of every day, she came home to a penthouse she'd chosen, to a man she'd chosen, to a life she'd built piece by piece from the wreckage of who she used to be. And that was worth more than approval. Worth more than understanding. Worth more than love stories that fit neat narratives. She was the Ice Queen. The woman who never cried. The wife who kept separate bedrooms. The foreigner who'd married Korea's most powerful man and refused to disappear into his shadow. And she'd never touched him to control him. She'd touched him carefully, occasionally, meaningfully only when love was no longer a weapon. Only when choice replaced fear. Only when freedom made staying more powerful than leaving. That was the story. Not the one they told, but the one that was real. And real, messy and complicated and uncertain and true, was enough. Some choices feel like escape. Others feel like truth. Some people call this control. Others call it choice. Which one did you see? If stories like this stay with you, Velvet Plot is where they live. Subscribe for more stories that don't let go easily.